7 stories, 7 superstars, 7 secrets that nearly destroyed their careers. What you're about to hear has been pieced together from whispered confessions and buried evidence. Each story is true, but the names remain hidden. Think you can identify these artists from the clues? The truth is darker than you could imagine. The first sign something was wrong came from an innocent-looking letter in the young superstar's fan mail, not the usual "I love your music" kind, but something that made her blood run cold. "I loved watching you bake those cinnamon rolls in your kitchen last night. The way you danced to that old Britney song while the oven preheated was adorable." She stood there in her Manhattan apartment holding that piece of paper, trying to convince herself there must be some logical explanation. She was used to dedicated fans. After all, she had millions of them, and they were generally amazing. But this was different. This person knew details about private moments that no one could possibly know. At first, she tried to brush it off. Maybe someone had seen her through a window, but she was on the 12th floor, and her kitchen faced an empty side of the building. The letters kept coming, each one more detailed than the last. "That red cardigan you wore while writing in your diary yesterday really brings out your eyes. Your cat looks so peaceful sleeping on that antique chair in your study. I noticed you changed your coffee order this morning, caramel macchiato instead of your usual vanilla latte." Her security team doubled down. They checked for cameras, swept for bugs, installed new alarm systems. But everything came up clean. The breaking point came during her stadium tour rehearsals. She was practicing a new choreography when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should ice that ankle. Saw you twist it slightly on the 3rd run-through. By the way, that new bridge you wrote at 3 in the morning last night, pure genius." That's when panic really set in. She called an emergency meeting with her management and security team. They went through everything, every possible breach, every staff member, every security protocol. The truth, when they finally uncovered it, was worse than anything she could have imagined. One of her most trusted security team members pulled her aside after the meeting, looking sick with guilt. He confessed that several members of her security detail had been running an exclusive online streaming channel, charging premium subscribers thousands of dollars for 24/7 access to her private life. They had hidden cameras everywhere: her bedroom, bathroom, studio, even her car. Every intimate moment, every conversation, every creative process, all broadcast to an obsessive community of wealthy stalkers. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. These were people she had trusted with her life, people who had protected her for years, who knew her fears about privacy and safety. They had turned her life into a sick reality show without her knowledge. The legal aftermath was swift and severe, but the psychological impact, that was something she still struggled with. She had cameras removed, houses swept, staff replaced. But how could she rebuild a sense of security when it had been shattered so completely? Now, every time she wrote a song, every time she danced in her kitchen, every private moment, there was always that flutter of paranoia. Were there more cameras? Was someone watching? The weird thing was, in a way, those creeps helped her understand something profound about fame and privacy in the digital age. She thought she understood the cost of being in the spotlight, but the reality was so much darker than anyone could imagine. These days, she has a new security team, and her homes are swept for cameras daily. But she's also learned to find a strange kind of power in radical transparency. She shares more of her life on her own terms, because sometimes the best defense against people who want to expose your private moments is to take control of your own narrative. But she still catches herself sometimes, alone in her kitchen, wondering if somewhere out there someone is watching her dance. Who do you think this famous cat lover is, whose private moments were turned into a twisted reality show? The sound engineer noticed it first, subtle changes in her voice, the kind only someone who'd spent thousands of hours behind a mixing board would catch. He'd worked with her for years, knew every nuance of her vocals, every signature riff, every tiny inflection that made her sound uniquely her. But something was different during these new recording sessions. The changes were microscopic at first. A slight tremor in her usually steady vibrato, a barely perceptible strain in her upper register. He chalked it up to fatigue. They were pushing hard to complete the album, and the schedule was brutal. But as the weeks went on, he started noticing more concerning patterns. Her voice would sometimes crack in places it never had before, not from technical issues, but from what seemed like emotional distress. During playback, he could hear a kind of desperate edge in her ad-libs, something frantic in her runs that hadn't been there in previous sessions. The worst part was watching her in the booth. She'd always been a natural, 1 or 2 takes max. Now she'd stand there for hours, tears streaming down her face as she tried to nail sections she could have done in her sleep just months ago. The problems weren't just vocal. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. She'd show up to sessions with this vacant look in her eyes, sometimes trembling, sometimes hyperactive. One day she spent 20 minutes repeating the same phrase over and over, each take more manic than the last, until she collapsed in the booth. The engineer started documenting everything, time-stamping the audio files where he heard the most concerning changes. He compiled vocal analysis charts showing the degradation in her pitch control, the irregular breathing patterns, the subtle signs of psychological distress that were literally encoded in her wavelengths. He took his findings to the label executives, tried to explain that something was seriously wrong. He played them the comparison tracks, her voice from 6 months ago versus now, showed them the spectrographic analysis revealing patterns consistent with severe emotional dysfunction. Their response? Just clean it up in post. We've got a release date to hit. She's always been a little dramatic. He went to her management team next. They listened politely, then reminded him about his non-disclosure agreement. The pressure to finish the album was intense. The label had already spent millions on production, marketing was ramping up, tour dates were being booked. Nobody wanted to hear that their golden goose was cracking up. One morning, he arrived at the studio to find all his access revoked. His key card didn't work. His computer login was disabled. 20 minutes later, he got a call from the label's legal department about breach of contract and interference with artist management. He was replaced by another engineer the same day. The album came out 3 months later. The critics praised the production value, but he could hear it, all of it. Every cry for help encoded in those perfect, polished tracks. The artificial stability created by auto-tune and heavy processing. The desperate gasps for air between lines that had been edited out. Sometimes he lies awake at night, listening to those raw session files he secretly backed up. You can hear it in the waveforms, the sound of someone drowning in plain sight while everyone around them adjusts the levels to make the drowning sound more commercially appealing. 4 years later, when everything finally came to light about what she'd been going through, he dug out his old analysis reports. Every warning sign had been there, documented in black and white, buried in the very frequencies of her voice. These days, he does a lot of guest lectures at audio engineering schools. He tells his students that their job isn't just to capture sound, it's to really listen, because sometimes in the space between the beats, in the subtle variations of a human voice, you can hear someone's soul crying out for help. And if you hear it, you have a moral obligation to speak up, no matter what it costs you. Think you know which iconic voice was crying out for help through the auto-tune? Share your thoughts in the comments about who this tragic studio story might be about. The personal trainer had been working with her for 2 years, watching her transform from an underground artist into a global sensation. The pressure to maintain a certain image was intense, but she always kept it real, kept her quirky personality. That's why the changes were so jarring when they started. It began after she hired this new wellness guru, some guy who'd supposedly worked with billionaires and elite athletes. She was excited about his holistic approach to mental and physical transformation. The first red flags appeared during her training sessions. She used to come in energized, cracking jokes, ready to work. Now she was showing up looking gaunt, dark circles under her eyes, but with this weird manic energy. Her usual hour-long sessions stretched into 2, then 3 hours. She'd insist on pushing through even when the trainer could see her hands shaking. When he suggested she might be overtraining, she'd respond with phrases that didn't sound like her at all. Exhaustion is the gateway to enlightenment. Physical limits are just mental weakness manifesting. The guru had apparently prescribed a strict dietary regimen. She was consuming nothing but clear liquids and some kind of proprietary supplement powder for days at a time. Her weight dropped dramatically, but whenever the trainer expressed concern, she'd talk about purifying the vessel and transcending physical needs. Then came the sleep deprivation. She casually mentioned during a session that she'd been doing these consciousness expansion exercises, staying awake for 48 hours straight, then sleeping for exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. She said it was about breaking the body's attachments to artificial rhythms. The trainer started documenting everything, taking notes after each session, recording her physical metrics, saving their text exchanges. The patterns were disturbing. Every time she completed one of the guru's purification protocols, she became more pliable, more detached from reality. Her social media posts grew increasingly erratic. She'd ramble about ascending beyond the physical plane, while looking like she could barely stand. The guru was always there now, hovering at the edge of their sessions, watching. He'd whisper things in her ear when she showed signs of doubt or resistance. The trainer did some digging into his background. Turned out he'd been involved with several fringe religious groups, specifically ones that used sleep and food deprivation for behavioral modification. He wasn't a wellness expert. He was an expert in breaking people down. The final straw came during a session where she nearly collapsed. As the trainer moved to help her, the guru stepped in and said, "Let her transcend her weakness." That's when he saw the vacant look in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in documentaries about cult survivors. He took his documentation to her management team. They were skeptical at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Detailed logs of her physical decline, recordings of her increasingly dissociative behavior, the guru's real background. It took them 3 days to verify his findings. On the 4th day, security quietly removed the guru from the premises. The recovery process was slow. Proper nutrition, regular sleep, trauma therapy. Gradually, her natural spark returned. She started making jokes again, being her authentic self. These days, she's back to her energetic, creative best. Though sometimes during their sessions, the trainer still catches her checking food labels with shaking hands or fighting the urge to push beyond healthy limits. She wrote a song about it recently, never released it officially, but she played it for him after a session. It was about how the entertainment industry makes you so desperate for transformation that you'll accept poison if it's labeled as medicine. He still keeps detailed session logs, but for a different reason now. Not to document a breakdown, but to celebrate recovery, to track healthy progress, to remind both of them that true wellness isn't about transcending human needs. It's about embracing them. And can you guess which chart-topping artist nearly fell victim to a predatory wellness guru? Leave your theories in the comments about who had to learn that true health isn't found in starvation and sleep deprivation. The story that would change the young journalist's career started with a single Instagram DM. "I have evidence about Drake, real evidence, but no one will listen." As a music journalist for an influential online magazine, she got messages like this all the time, usually clout chasers or conspiracy theorists. But something about this one felt different. The sender had included a screenshot of a non-disclosure agreement with a settlement amount that made her jaw drop. 7 figures plus an extensive list of prohibited topics and contact restrictions. She started pulling threads, carefully, methodically, cross-referencing social media posts, tour dates, private party guest lists. More women came forward, speaking in whispers, sharing redacted documents. A pattern emerged. Not just of inappropriate behavior, but of a sophisticated system designed to bury it. The management company had it down to a science. First came the charm offensive, gifts, apologies, promises of career opportunities. Then, if that didn't work, the pressure campaign, subtle threats about industry blacklisting, comments about how hard it is to prove defamation. Finally, the NDAs, thick stacks of papers filled with language so restrictive, it basically prevented the women from speaking about entire years of their lives. Her editor was nervous about running the story. The management company's legal team was legendary. They'd crushed better journalists than her, but they had documents, dozens of them, screenshots, audio recordings, money trails leading through a maze of shell companies. Most importantly, they had sources willing to break their NDAs. One night, while she was organizing her files, her apartment's security system glitched, just for a few minutes. When she checked her laptop the next morning, crucial files were missing. Her backup drive was corrupted. The cloud storage folder was empty, but they made a mistake. Then they didn't know about the physical evidence. She'd learned early in her career to keep hard copies stored in multiple locations, old school, analog, unhackable. The real bombshell wasn't even the allegations themselves. It was the infrastructure built to hide them. Private investigators, crisis management firms, tech companies specializing in digital evidence removal, a whole shadow industry dedicated to making problems disappear. She discovered that the management company had a dedicated department officially labeled talent protection with an annual budget bigger than most record labels. They didn't just react to scandals, they preempted them, monitoring social media for potential exposures, identifying possible liability issues before they went public. The story ran on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 different law firms had filed injunctions. By Tuesday night, their website was experiencing technical difficulties. By Wednesday, competing outlets were running hit pieces about her credibility. But it was too late. The documents were out there. Other reporters started digging. More sources came forward. The whole system began to crack. The truth about power in the music industry became clear. It's built on silence. Silence bought with money, enforced by lawyers, maintained through fear. But silence has a way of breaking. All it takes is one voice, one person brave enough to face the machinery of silence and say, no more. These days, she still gets Instagram DMs. More than ever, actually. But they're different now. They're from people saying thank you, people finding their voice, people ready to break their silence. The management company, they're still in business, still powerful. But they're not untouchable anymore. Their perfect system has cracks in it now. And through those cracks, the truth keeps leaking out. She keeps all the NDAs collected during her investigation framed on her office wall. Not the real ones. Those are locked away safe, but copies, Seth. 37 sheets of dense legal language, each one designed to buy someone's silence. They remind her that every story matters, every voice counts. Sometimes the biggest lies in the music industry aren't in the lyrics, they're in the paperwork. The music industry's biggest names often hide the darkest secrets. Share your thoughts below if you think you know which superstar's management team built an empire of silence. His vocal coach noticed something wrong during their weekly session in early 2021. The Weeknd's signature falsetto, usually effortlessly haunting, cracked on a simple scale. With 20 years of training artists in Los Angeles, this veteran coach had never seen such a rapid decline in such a distinctive voice. The dimly lit studio now echoed with strained attempts at hitting notes that once came naturally. The artist brushed it off, blaming it on the previous night's show. But the coach saw the wince of pain he tried to hide, noticed how he kept rubbing his throat between warm-ups. During their next session, the strain in his voice was worse. Dark circles shadowed his eyes beneath his signature hairstyle, and he kept clearing his throat between exercises. The water bottle he usually sipped from had been replaced with throat coat tea and honey. When the coach suggested rest, he just shook his head. Can't. The label needs the tour to finish on schedule. The tickets are sold. That's when the coach noticed the prescription bottles peeking out of his designer bag. 3 different types of steroids for vocal inflammation, all prescribed by different doctors. The labels told a story of escalating desperation. The coach had seen this before. Labels pushing artists too hard, masking injuries until permanent damage was done. Young talents burning bright and fast, their voices permanently altered by the relentless demands of touring. But this was a whole new level of exploitation. The coach started digging, quietly asking questions around the industry, piecing together a disturbing pattern. A lighting tech told them about violent coughing fits backstage, how the artist would disappear into his dressing room between songs, emerging with red-rimmed eyes and a forced smile. A backup singer mentioned bleeding vocal cords, showing smartphone videos of tissue-stained microphones quickly whisked away by handlers. But what terrified them most was the conversation overheard between two label executives after a show in Las Vegas, their voices carrying across the empty arena. "The nodules are getting worse. Doctor says if he doesn't rest now, the damage could be permanent. We're talking career-ending stuff here." The other exec laughed, the sound echoing off the stadium seats. "That's what the steroids are for. We've got 15 more shows to get through." He signed the contract. "The insurance will cover any repairs we need to make." The coach confronted the artist the next day, showing him medical research about the dangers of performing with untreated nodules. Images of scarred vocal cords spread across the piano top like evidence at a crime scene. The mix of fear and resignation in his eyes was haunting. "They own my voice," he whispered, his words barely audible. "The contract gives them full rights to my performances for the next 3 years. Do you know what they'll do if I try to back out? They'll take everything." The coach spent a sleepless night listening to recordings of the artist's early work, thinking about how the industry treats artists like disposable commodities. The raw talent in those early tracks, the pure emotion in every note, it was all being sacrificed for ticket sales and streaming numbers. The next morning, calls were made to trusted music journalists who had covered similar stories of industry exploitation. 3 days later, a story broke about predatory management practices and medical negligence. Screenshots of medical reports and videos of struggling performances spread across social media. The label tried to bury it, but the evidence was too damning. The tour was suspended for medical reasons. The artist took 6 months off to properly heal, disappearing from the spotlight into a cocoon of vocal rehabilitation and legal negotiations. These days, his voice is strong again, though it never quite recovered that ethereal quality that first made him famous. The highest notes now have a slight rasp, a shadow of strain that only trained ears might notice. Sometimes when his old recordings play, those haunting high notes floating through darkness, the coach thinks about how close the industry came to losing one of the most distinctive voices of their generation. When young artists sign their first big contracts now, the coach tells them this story as a warning, but never reveals who it was about. That's not their secret to tell, though if you listen to his early work and compare it to now, you might figure it out. Can you guess which iconic voice almost vanished from music forever? Drop your theories in the comments below. The choreographer first noticed the change during tour rehearsals in 2022. One of the dancers collapsed after a particularly demanding sequence, normal enough in this industry. But what happened next wasn't normal at all. Within minutes, a medical team appeared with an unmarked black case. The dancer returned 30 minutes later, moving with an unnatural precision that made the choreographer's skin crawl. Over the next few weeks, more concerning patterns emerged. Bruises that should have taken days to heal disappeared overnight. Sprains that should have benched dancers were forgotten by morning. In a profession where injuries were as common as breathing, this defied everything the choreographer knew about the human body's limits. The choreographer started keeping detailed records, noting down every injury and miraculous recovery. Between rehearsals, she photographed the bizarre transformations, angry red swelling that vanished in hours, twisted ankles that seemed to right themselves overnight. The dancers' behavior shifted too. Their eyes seemed glazed, movements mechanical, despite their technical perfection. During water breaks, they spoke in muted tones about gaps in their memories, hours and sometimes entire days missing. Some couldn't remember their morning commutes. Others forgot conversations they'd had moments before. The production's lead dancer was the worst affected. Once known for her bubbly personality and infectious laugh, she now moved through rehearsals like a programmed robot, hitting every mark with eerie accuracy. Her signature ponytail swung with metronome-like precision as she executed each move flawlessly, too flawlessly. The choreographer discovered the truth by accident. Late one night, after most of the crew had left, she found a document left open on a production laptop. Clinical trial reports, experimental neural blockers, syntheses, something about temporary synaptic modification for enhanced performance and pain management. The scientific language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out: potential long-term cognitive impact and memory dissociation as side effect. The dates aligned perfectly with the dancer's strange behavior. Each treatment date corresponded with a noted personality shift. When she tried to talk to the production's doctor about it, she received a cease and desist letter the next day. The medical team started watching her closely. She noticed a black sedan following her home. Strange men in suits appeared during rehearsals, taking notes. Then, the lead dancer missed 3 days of rehearsal. When she returned, she couldn't remember the choreography she'd spent months perfecting, but she smiled, the first real smile in weeks, and asked what they were working on. That's when the choreographer knew she had to act. She compiled her evidence, videos of the medical team's late-night visits, time-stamped photographs of injuries that impossibly disappeared, and dancer testimonies about their missing memories. The footage of their star performer was the most damaging, side-by-side comparison showing the gradual loss of artistic expression, the mechanical precision replacing natural grace. One anonymous email to a prominent dance magazine later, the story exploded. The label denied everything, but the damage was done. The tour was postponed for restructuring. The medical team disappeared overnight, leaving behind empty offices and shredded documents. These days, most of the dancers have recovered their memories, though some still report strange gaps. The lead dancer took a year off to recover. When she returned to performing, critics noted that her signature moves had changed, less acrobatic, more grounded. Her eyes sparkled again, but there was a wariness there too, a knowledge of what had been taken from her. The choreographer still works in the industry, but now includes medical supervision transparency in every contract. She keeps copies of those original medical documents in a safe deposit box, insurance against the day someone tries to reintroduce these treatments. Sometimes during big productions, when she sees the medical teams hovering in the wings, she thinks about those months of mechanical perfection and what it cost. She never names names when telling this story to young dancers, but if you watch certain performances from that era, you'll see it. The moment when the artistry became automation, when the soul of the dance was sacrificed for superhuman precision. In the end, she learned that true perfection isn't about hitting every mark. It's about the humanity between the beats, the subtle imperfections that make a performance real. Watch any major tour from that year and see if you can spot when your favorite performer's signature moves became a little too perfect. Share your guesses in the comments about which pop icon survived this dark chapter. The head of security started doubting everything in January 2023. After 12 years protecting A-list celebrities, he knew the difference between overzealous fans and something more sinister. This was different. The fans showing up at private locations knew things they shouldn't, details about last-minute schedule changes, unannounced appearances, even the color of outfit she'd wear that day. Even her most casual choices became public knowledge within hours. The black hoodie she grabbed last minute from her closet would be trending on social media before she reached her destination. The specific green tea she started drinking for her throat, fans were showing up with the exact same brand, the same limited edition flavor. At first, he blamed social media leaks, but then the incidents became more frequent, more targeted. A group waiting outside a private dance studio that had been booked under a false name. Photographers at a secret recording session scheduled just hours before. Gift packages delivered to hotels where bookings were made under strict aliases. Even the floor numbers and room service orders seemed to leak. His team logged every incident, creating an extensive timeline. The pattern was unsettling. These weren't lucky guesses. Someone was feeding information to these people. He increased security protocols, implementing random route changes and last-minute location switches. He started varying transportation methods, using decoy vehicles, and switching between multiple safe houses. Still, they showed up. During a private dinner with family, he caught someone filming through the restaurant's kitchen. The footage appeared online within minutes, along with a detailed description of her meal. The most disturbing part, they knew about her new food allergies, information that only her immediate team possessed. The level of detail in these leaks was frightening, down to the brand of water she now avoided and the specific ingredients she couldn't eat. He started vetting everyone on the inside. The makeup artist who always arrived early and seemed to text constantly. The new social media manager who worked remotely and had access to her daily schedule. The backup dancers who joined the tour last month and were always photographing everything for memories. But background checks came back clean, too clean almost, as if they'd been scrubbed by professionals. One night he discovered his own security feeds were being accessed remotely. Someone had installed monitoring software on the central system. The timestamp showed logins during team meetings when everyone was supposedly present in the room. Cross-referencing the access logs revealed multiple devices connecting from inside their secure network. The young artist's anxiety worsened. She started checking under her bed behind shower curtains. Her trademark confidence on stage began to crack. During one performance, she froze mid-song, staring at someone in the crowd who looked familiar. The security team found nothing, but her fear was real. She started wearing oversized clothes again, trying to disappear inside them. Then came the incident that confirmed his suspicions. A fan approached her at a charity event with a birthday card. Inside was a photo taken in her private dressing room. Just 10 minutes earlier, the only people with access were her core team. The image showed her vulnerable, unguarded moment of anxiety before going on stage. He launched his own investigation, setting up hidden cameras and tracking devices, creating false information trails to catch the leaks. The evidence led him to an unexpected discovery. Several team members were part of an underground network that traded celebrity information for cash. Private moments, secret schedules, personal details, all sold to the highest bidder. Some stalkers were actually hired actors, creating artificial incidents to drive up the price of real information. The scheme went deeper than anyone imagined, involving multiple artists and teams. When he took the evidence to management, phones started ringing. High-powered lawyers appeared, but he'd already backed up everything, sending copies to trusted sources. The story broke 2 days later. Several team members quietly disappeared from the industry. New security protocols were implemented across all major labels. These days, he still works in celebrity protection, but he treats everyone with the same suspicion, even the ones who bring morning coffee. Sometimes he catches a glimpse of his former client on stage, her confidence restored, and thinks about how close they came to breaking her. He never discusses the details publicly, but he teaches security teams one crucial lesson. Sometimes the real threat isn't trying to fit in center. Which young superstar do you think faced this terrifying betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments if you've connected the dots.